Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Wednesday, November 6, 2019. Now, whether you've watched C-SPAN or other coverage of members of the House or Senate giving a speech on the floor, and they have that unusual phrase they use at the end. I reserve the right to revise and extend my remarks. You've heard that a zillion times, right? Well, yesterday, one of the interviewees who will be a public witness in the forthcoming impeachment hearings, Gordon Sondland. He's the hotel owner from Portland, Oregon, paid $1 million to Trump's inaugural committee, was rewarded by being named the ambassador to the European Union, and he was Trump's go-to guy, the enforcer in the efforts to brush back the new President Zelensky in Ukraine and get him to conduct some investigation into Joe Biden or the origins of 2016 election meddling or alleged election meddling. And so Gordon Sondland pulled a maneuver yesterday. He revised and extended his remarks. And he revised them to put them into the same context as people who have testified after him. So understand that Sondland went in, I believe he was the second one to answer questions of the impeachment investigators in these interviews. And he tried to slide past the question of whether there was a quid pro quo. And he initially tried to lay it on Trump that Trump had said there's no quid pro quo, so there isn't. But at the same time, Sondland was pressing Zelensky and his underlings to publicly state that they were going to investigate the Bidens and the Manafort 2016 actions in Ukraine. And it is explicit. While Trump claims that the partial transcript, the memo of the conversation that he released, and we still haven't seen the unredacted, unedited version of that phone call transcript. Trump says, there's no quid pro quo. I asked him for a favor, but it wasn't linked to anything. But there are now two key issues. The release of the military aid that had been approved by Congress and was being held up by the White House under direct orders from Trump, and the dangling of a White House visit to be extended to Zelensky when he played ball, when he did what Rudy Giuliani wanted him to do. And I'd just like to take a second here to give you my current view of the Ukraine Gate investigation. I was initially skeptical, partly because it's not as simple as Democratic leaders have made it out to be. They have described it as an open and shut case. But as we're seeing, the Republicans are quite resourceful, and they know no limits of morality or the law to try to wiggle out of the behavior that is being exposed. And so my current take is that Trump is vulnerable here to charges of abuse of his power for personal gain. And while the Republicans argue, and others who aren't Trump supporters but simply look at the history, there are many times that members of both parties have used their positions and control over money or other goods that were going to be delivered to another country, and they held them up. But they did so not for personal or domestic political considerations. And sometimes it was above board, it was justifiable, and sometimes it wasn't. But in this case, because Trump was directly involved, he used his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, who had no status. He didn't get named, temporary envoy, a special representative of the president, nothing like that. He's just a guy. And even Giuliani says he did it for free and that he wasn't acting as a lawyer. I'm not sure what that rationale does to benefit Giuliani, but I'm sure that's why he advances it. So Sondland touched up his testimony. He said that hearing the others like Bill Taylor and Tim Morrison give their information to the committees had refreshed his recollection. He said he believed that withholding the aid was ill-advised, although he didn't know when, why, or by whom the aid was suspended. He said he came to believe that the aid was tied to the investigations. I presumed that the aid suspension had become linked to the proposed anti-corruption statement. Now, he is still attempting to provide some insulation to Trump here. And I think it's a very tough straddle for Gordon Sondland and for his lawyers. But he appears to have pulled himself back from the brink of potential charges of lying to Congress, which is what Roger Stone is on trial for, and we'll get to his story coming up here shortly. So, as I mentioned, the House Intelligence Committee will hold the first public hearings in the impeachment inquiry next week. And Adam Schiff has announced his first witnesses will be Bill Taylor, the top American envoy to Ukraine, George Kent, a top State Department official, Marie Yovanovitch, the former American ambassador who was recalled by Trump. All of those will be next week, Wednesday and Friday. And we pretty much know what they say because the transcripts have been released, and before that, opening statements and other shall we say, selective leaks have given the public a pretty good idea of what these people have to say. Now today, in an unusual move, one of the people who'd been subpoenaed by the committees actually showed up. His name is David Hale, number 3 guy at the State Department, the first administration official this week to comply with subpoenas. There were 3 no-shows. Russell Vought, acting director of Office of Management and Budget, Ulrich Breckbuhl, a counselor at the State Department who was said to be listening in on the July 25th call, and Rick Perry, the soon-to-be former Energy Secretary, who I guess will go back to Dancing with the Stars, or maybe he can bail out. What was that guy's name? The press secretary. See, these people just fly right by. Anyway, the first press secretary, Sean Spicer, is on Dancing with the Stars. People tell me. I wouldn't know because I've never watched that show. Now, Sondland is also being challenged by a lawyer for Fiona Hill, the former White House foreign policy advisor, who has also testified. And Hill's lawyer says that Sondland has made up meetings and conversations. Quote, he has fabricated communications with Dr. Hill, none of which were over coffee. That's what Sondland had said. He talked to her several times over coffee. And I'm not sure how the coffee becomes important here, but I guess it shows that somebody is lying and somebody isn't. There's now this orchestrated effort among Republican supporters of Trump to press for the outing, the identification of the so-called CIA whistleblower, number 1 or number 2. We're told there are 2 of them. And as you know, I have mixed feelings about this because I don't believe that somebody who gets to keep their job at the CIA, who has called him or herself a whistleblower, is actually a whistleblower. I think they are conniving the use of the whistleblower standards and channels in order to get this information to surface. And now that it has surfaced and we have all these different comments and testimony, Democrats say, well, we may not need the whistleblower because, they rang the alarm bell and that's all they had to do. But Monday night in Kentucky, when Trump held one of his mob rallies, and it didn't work because his candidate, Matt Bevin, is narrowly the loser of the governor's election held on Tuesday. At any rate, Rand Paul took to the stage at the mob rally, and he demanded that the media name the whistleblower. And he went on to say that the whistleblower is a material witness to the possible corruption of Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. Now, I don't know the name that is purported to be assigned to this whistleblower or anything about the person, but the pre-exposure attacks are already underway. And according to Rush Limbaugh, Donnie Trump Jr. has tweeted the name of this person. It's been reported online at Real Clear Investigations. I have not peeked. And the idea that Rand Paul knows who this is, and then says the whistleblower might have traveled with Joe Biden to Ukraine for all we know. Well, this is wild speculation. And asked if he had any evidence, Rand Paul said, "We don't know unless we ask." Now, he's an ophthalmologist, and maybe there's something wrong with his glasses. But the obsession by Republicans with outing the whistleblower, to me, is an indication that they are looking for another pillar or post that they can lean on as they avoid the, general thrust of this impeachment investigation and try to paint the Democrats as partisan and biased and unfair and secretive and all that stuff. So we'll see how that plays out. Meanwhile, media organizations are generally declining to play ball and even name the alleged whistleblower, or the name that people like Rand Paul and Don Jr. are suggesting is the individual. Dean Baquet, who is the problematic editor-in-chief or executive editor of the New York Times, says, "I'm not convinced his identity is important at this point, or at least important enough to put him at any risk or to unmask someone who doesn't want to be identified. Pretty much everything has now been discussed or confirmed on the record multiple times by others in the administration. So I'm not sure I see the point of unmasking someone who wants to remain anonymous." Now, on the one hand, media organizations have a long record of protecting rape victims, underage persons who are in police custody or charged with a crime. But this is a real wobbler. And an aggressive media would want to expose the whistleblower and, investigate the credibility of that person, try to get an interview with them. That's how an independent journalist would play this. But the media is going to great lengths to protect the whistleblower, as I believe they have to protect Joe Biden. And when I hear this talk about how, Trump was trying to get Zelensky to dig up dirt on Biden, well, depending on your perspective and your orientation, there is dirt on Joe Biden. It's pretty dirty that while he was put in charge of the post-U.S.-backed coup in Ukraine and trying to reduce the corruption there, and there's no question Ukraine has long been a corrupt country, that his son got a $50,000 a month gig to show up twice a year on the board of Burisma Holdings. Just that snapshot right there. It's dirty. I'm not saying it's criminal. I'm not saying that it shows, that Joe Biden was involved with Hunter in some underhanded scheme. But just the optics on the surface are dirty. And when I hear these media anchors on PBS and elsewhere repeatedly declare that there is no evidence of wrongdoing by the Bidens, I'm sorry, that is denial. And that is a bill of protection around Joe Biden. And the media is showing its partisanship in these jaundiced times. Meanwhile, some Senate Republicans, and Rand Paul is one of them, they are planning some stunts some hijinks when and I think it is likely the House will return articles of impeachment that will lead to a trial in the Senate presided over by Chief Justice John Roberts. And some of these Republicans, like John Kennedy of Louisiana and Rand Paul, are floating the idea of summoning Hunter Biden and his daddy to testify in the impeachment proceedings. Now, there's been pushback. Get this, John Cornyn, the knuckle-dragger from Texas, who I have almost zero respect for, discarded the idea. I think that's just a sideshow, he said. Impeachment is a very solemn, serious constitutional process. I think whatever the House decides to vote on, that's what we ought to consider and not make this any more of a reality show than it's likely to become. But the chorus is growing. Steve Bannon was on Fox News Sunday. The Bidens have to be called. Joe Biden is a hand grenade and Hunter Biden is the pin. Huh? I mean, that's a bizarre statement. Consider the source and the media outlet that brought it to you. And Lindsey Graham, well, he's kind of all over the place. I heard Rush Limbaugh slamming him today because Lindsey isn't all on board with the defense of Donald Trump. And he said, I'm not going to call Hunter or Joe Biden to the Senate Judiciary Committee. It's just not proper. I don't have jurisdiction, and I'm an institutional guy. On the other hand, he has said that his previous idea of inviting Giuliani to testify before judiciary may have passed. Yesterday, Graham said he didn't expect Giuliani to appear, and others said it would be a bad idea. Well, for the Republicans, I think it would be. And it looks like we're going to see action after Thanksgiving, not before, on two investigations of the origins of the Mueller investigation, one by the Inspector General of the Justice Department, the Washington Post speculating that it might be out on November 20th, but more likely after Thanksgiving. And then there is the Bill Barr and John Durham report, which we know was converted into or upgraded into a criminal investigation. And they appear to be gunning to get some of that out before at least the end of the year, if not in early December. As I mentioned, today is day 2 of the Roger Stone trial in Washington. They had jury selection yesterday. Roger complained of food poisoning and had to go home early. But today, the prosecutors began their presentation based on the charges that Roger Stone lied to Congress. And it relates to his communications with Trump and his efforts to get word to and from WikiLeaks about the schedule for release of the emails that reached WikiLeaks in a manner that still remains unknown. Yes, Mueller said it came from Russia, but as you know, I have not been persuaded on that key point. So, did Stone, he had some phone calls with Donald Trump that are entered into evidence. They only have the call records, though. They don't have intercepts of what was said. And so Roger Stone was attempting to be a go-between. There's Randy Credico, I guess he's a comic and a radio reporter at WBAI in New York. And Credico was, I believe, implicated by Stone, but has denied that he was any kind of an intermediary between Roger Stone and Julian Assange or anyone else at WikiLeaks. So I actually don't think there's going to be much coming out of this trial. I think that it's likely Roger Stone lied. Will he be convicted and will he do hard time as a result? Gosh, whatever happened to Roger Clemens? You remember him, the Red Sox pitcher who went to Congress and lied about whether he had used performance-enhancing drugs? Nothing ever happened to him. So why should Roger Stone suffer a fate worse than Roger Clemens? I don't know. So we'll see how that one plays out. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And there are a lot of great folks who kick in $5 or $10 every month. People like Joe Clarici, Carl Howard, Jerry in Southeast Portland, and Siri Walgren, who lives in far north California. I appreciate their support for my work, and I'd appreciate it if you sign up for a subscription, too. I don't want to be too pointed. I'm not going to reach into your wallet. But I will encourage you, if you're so inclined, to visit peterbcollins.com, click on menu, click on Become a Subscriber. You'll hit the sign-up page, and it's easy to choose a level of support that's comfortable for you. And should you be allergic to PayPal, you can communicate with me at my P.O. Box, number 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Here's a story I was tipped to yesterday, but I held back because of the source. It's Project Veritas, which is James O'Keefe's provocateur organization that does hidden camera videos, selective editing, and that sort of thing. But additional coverage has persuaded me that in this case, Project Veritas has a credible report that was leaked to it from someone who works at ABC Television News. And it is a clip of a video that was shot while anchor Amy Robach of 2020 was talking with a colleague. It was never broadcast or intended for broadcast, but it was recorded. Her mic was hot, the camera was rolling, and Amy Robach offered bitter complaints about how ABC News management had refused to broadcast what she thought were blockbuster interviews and coverage of Jeffrey Epstein's sexual crimes. And in particular, she had an exclusive interview with one of the complaining witnesses, whose name is Virginia Giuffre, and ABC refused to run it. Here is that purloined clip from the hot mic of Amy Robach.
I've had the story for 3 years. I've had this interview with Virginia Roberts. We would not put it on the air. First of all, I was told, who's Jeffrey Epstein? No one knows who that is. This is a stupid story. Then the palace found out that we had her whole allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us a million different ways. We were so afraid we wouldn't be able to interview Kate and Will that also quashed the story. And then Alan Dershowitz was also implicated in it because of the planes. She told me everything. She had pictures. She had everything. She was in hiding for 12 years. We convinced her to talk to us. It was unbelievable what we had. Clinton. We had everything. I tried for 3 years to get it on, to no avail, and now it's all coming out, and it's like these new revelations, and I freaking had all of it. I'm so pissed right now. Like, every day I get more and more pissed because I'm just like, oh my God, what we had was unreal. Other women backing it up. Hey, yep. Brad Edwards, the attorney, 3 years ago, saying there will come a day when we will realize Jeffrey Epstein was the most prolific pedophile this country has ever known. And I had it all 3 years ago.
So let me explain that early in my radio career, I worked for the American broadcasting companies. The entity today is ABC News. And I had a lot of problems with the company lawyers who would deny me the ability to publish or broadcast a story, usually because they were protecting powerful people. So this is not new. And I do credit Ronan Farrow for exposing NBC and the way they tried to kill his investigations of Harvey Weinstein. I'll give a shout-out to Rachel Maddow for some courage. It took her a long time, but she finally had Ronan Farrow on her show a couple of Fridays ago and gave him a good period of time to explain how NBC had blocked his reporting. Rachel did put a positive spin on how NBC management is getting the message. But CBS has egg on its face for killing the Jeff Wiegand disclosures about the tobacco industry, when CBS was controlled by the Tisch family that also owned Lorillard Tobacco. And so while you may feel sorry for Amy Robach, and she's back on her meds, she issued a statement saying that, well, She'd been referring to what Jeffrey had said in the interview, not what ABC News had verified through its own reporting. The interview itself, while I was disappointed it didn't air, didn't meet our standards, Robach said yesterday. In the years since, no one has ever told me or the team to stop reporting on Jeffrey Epstein. Well, that's not what she said in her whining clip. You may be aware that yesterday I released an in-depth interview with filmmaker Kevin McKiernan about his film, From Wounded Knee to Standing Rock, A Reporter's Journey. And I hope you'll give it a listen. I think it was very interesting. McKiernan was there for the occupation of Wounded Knee back in 1973. And I note that this is Native American Heritage Month, which is just another one of those calendar observations that, allows people to issue statements and hold conferences and that sort of thing. It's generally meaningless. But the Trump White House has tried to displace Native American Heritage Month with a whole new pro-white observance called National American History and Founders Month. And I credit Natasha Leonard at The Intercept with bringing this to our attention. And the new proclamation is hardly, she says, the first violence enacted against Native people. Just days into his presidency, Trump approved the completion of the Dakota Access Pipeline, which the indigenous people had protested at Standing Rock. Then there's the Pocahontas episodes with Elizabeth Warren. And now, National American History and Founders Month is based on a proclamation that makes no mention of Native people, states that we must develop a deeper understanding of our American history. So this is an effort to bury tribal history and advance white supremacy. I can't see any other explanation. A federal judge in Manhattan earlier today overturned the Trump administration's expansive conscience rule, which would have made it easier for the government to punish healthcare institutions or states and cities with the loss of federal funds if they don't allow workers to object to abortion or other medical procedures on religious or moral grounds. And this is further expansion of the pandering to the evangelical right in this country. And the court has ruled properly. The judge, in a 140-page opinion, said that the Health and Human Services Department didn't have the authority to impose major portions of the rule, and that the agency's stated justification for undertaking rulemaking in the first place, a purported, quote, significant increase, end quote, in civilian complaints, was factually untrue. Where have we heard that before? It's in the Supreme Court ruling about adding a citizenship question to the 2020 census. Over at Mint Press News, I want to commend reporter Alan McLeod, who noted that last week Nancy Pelosi spent time in New York. She gave an interview to Bloomberg News. She also spent a long time on Stephen Colbert's Late Show. And in both cases, I wish Nancy would just keep quiet. Because on the Colbert Show, she was promoting impeachment, and I really found it, she's quoting Thomas Paine and saying all this stuff. I didn't find it very persuasive, and I think it undercut her authority. And in the Bloomberg interview, Pelosi went out of her way to diss Medicare for All, saying that she doesn't think it's a good idea, and she uses this this facile approach. As a left-wing San Francisco liberal, what works in San Francisco does not necessarily work in Michigan. But she said what will work in Michigan will work in San Francisco, as if we're just, lefty idiots who will sit down and shut up when we're told to do so. And during the interview, Pelosi also refused to endorse a wealth tax hike like those proposed by Sanders and Warren. Now, McLeod points out that Pelosi is the third highest paid elected official in the U.S., making $223,000 a year, and she has a net worth north of $100 million, shared with her husband, Paul. And so maybe she feels that a wealth tax would hurt her and her friends who are so generous in making all those political contributions that she shovels up every election cycle. So I think there are good points in here. I've linked to the article for your perusal at peterbcollins.com in the show file for today's podcast. And quickly to a few other items. Ayanna Pressley is the fourth member of the squad. The other three have all endorsed Bernie Sanders. But Pressley of Massachusetts has decided to support her own state home, Elizabeth Warren. Not a big surprise there. And the surprises came in from Kentucky and a little bit from Virginia in the off-year elections last night. Matt Bevin, the unpopular Republican who was endorsed and slimed by Trump in one of those mob rallies on Monday night. He is trailing Andy Beshear, whose daddy was governor before Bevin, and Beshear is ahead by a mere 5,000 votes, and Bevin is not quite calling for a recount, but some sort of retabulation of the results to see if he can get something more favorable. Meanwhile, here in San Francisco, a race that drew national attention for district attorney, because one of the candidates, Chesa Boudin, is the son of Weather Underground radicals Kathy Boudin and David Harris. And Boudin, who has been working, as I said, as a public defender, ran for district attorney on a promise to make dramatic changes in a progressive direction. Now, he has a narrow lead right now over the establishment candidate, Susie Loftus. Boudin has 31.8%. She's got 31.1%. And now we go into the ranked choice voting rounds. And unfortunately, if I have to speculate at this point, I fear that the votes that came from the other two candidates and the second choice will now be applied to either Boudin or Loftus. Well, the other two candidates are kind of law and order types, more aligned with Susie Loftus than with Chesa Boudin. But we will await the final tally, and I'll be happy to share that with you when it comes in. Remember that woman who flipped off Trump's motorcade? She was riding her bike in Virginia, and it went by. Well, her name is Julie Briskman. She's 52 years old, and she is now a member of the County Board of Supervisors in Loudoun County, Virginia. And she defeated a Republican to take the job, and in her district is the Trump National Golf Course in Sterling, Virginia. Sometimes it pays to flip the bird. I'm pleased to report here in California there is growing support for a takeover of the rogue and bankrupt utility Pacific Gas and Electric. Driven by San Jose's mayor, Sam Liccardo, his idea is for a customer-owned cooperative like Georgia Power and Light. Now, I'm not familiar with all the details of how Georgia Power and Light is structured, but I am open to any transition of ownership that takes it away from the investor-owned utility, PG&E. We'll keep you posted on that one as well. Want to recommend you read a piece by Kevin Gostola over at Shadowproof today. He points out that the lawyers for Josh Schulte, who is accused, he's a former CIA employee who's accused of leaking the Vault 7 hacking tools, well, they are challenging his indictment under the Espionage Act as unconstitutional. And this is an obvious preliminary move by his attorneys. I hope it is successful. It could help change the landscape for one Julian Assange, assuming that he at some point is extradited to the United States. A lot of Americans only know this guy by his bellow. John Bercow recently stepped down as the Speaker of Britain's House of Commons. He's the one who had to tame the unruly members. Order, order was his call. And in an interview reported on by The Guardian, he blasted Brexit. I don't think it helps the UK. Brexit is the biggest mistake of this country after World War II. I respect the Prime Minister Johnson, but Brexit doesn't help us. It's better to be part of the EU power bloc. Well, I think that's true, but I'm sitting 5,000 miles away, and I do not try to visit my views on the British people. Also, I want to recommend a piece by Ben Norton over at Gray Zone today. And the Gray Zone Project covers a report written by a think tank which is called Syria in the Gray Zone. And he quotes Dana Stroul, a longtime U.S. diplomat who now runs the operation for the Middle East at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She says that while Trump ordered our troops out of Syria, we're now in a new phase of the war, a U.S. military occupation of Syria's resource-rich economic powerhouse. Diplomatic isolation of the Syrian government is recommended. Economic sanctions are also proposed, and preventing reconstruction aid and technical expertise from going back into Syria. So they want to prolong the suffering of the Syrian people. None of that is mentioned, of course, because they're more interested in the oil, as Trump has articulated. Finally, today, the New York Times has some warning that now that it has sealed up Syria, which is not quite true, that Russia is turning its sights to Libya, another failed state that you can put at the feet of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. And they warn that Comrade Khalifa Hifter, a one-time CIA asset who is now based in eastern Libya and trying to take control of the whole country, he's getting support from the Wagner Group, the Kremlin-linked private company that's their equivalent of Blackwater. And we are supposed to be very worried because Russia is moving into Libya. And this article goes on for almost 4 pages when I printed it out, and they don't even politely mention how Libya got into the condition it is. Here's the history. Having collapsed into feuding city-states after the overthrow of the longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, Libya is less a functioning state than a vast and bloated public payroll. Citizens and towns are united only by a shared dependence on the oil revenue flowing through the National Bank in Tripoli. Now, they do mention that Hifter, age 75, was a former general under Gaddafi who defected and lived as a CIA client in Northern Virginia for more than 10 years. But no mention of Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Susan Rice, or any of the people responsible for the bad policy that left Libya as a failed state open to Russian opportunism. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it all over the place. It's on YouTube, and I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you.